basket quilts with curved handles are some of my favorites, and the samples I have today are just wonderful. Now, this basket quilt is a pattern from Hearth and Home magazine called Fruit Basket. Oh, it's a collection of plaids and stripes. It was probably made in the 1860s, and the baskets literally spin when you look at them. Now, the quilt maker didn't worry if she cut off the points on her feet, and then she sewed the handles down by machine. Well, my friend Sue Bouchard found the top in Paducah, Kentucky, and then she had my cousin Carol Ann machine quilt it with stippling. Ooh, it's funky, but it's so charming. I just love it. Now, Sue made this wall hanging in earth tone baskets with gray side triangles, and it just looks perfect on this antique sewing machine. And then the large quilt is just handsome in its dark colors. Now, Sue made it just recently with a collection of reproduction 1860s fabrics. The pattern has been called Little Basket or Baby Basket, and the Kansas City Star referred to it as the May Basket. Well, the finished size of the block is 5 inches square, and then the handles are just narrow 7/8 inch bias strips. Now, Sue started sewing them all by hand, but when she ran out of time, she sewed them by machine with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. And then the blocks are set together on point with solid squares in between. Sandy Thompson did the machine quilting, just straight lines. It's great. Now, when the U.S. Postal Service issued commemorative stamps on March 8, 1978, this pattern became known as the postage stamp basket. Oh, can you imagine? First-class stamps for 13 cents. As part of the American Folk Art Series, these 4 stamps portray segments of an old American quilt made in New York City in 1875. Well, the basket design is positioned diagonally with its handles pointed towards the center of the block of stamps. Now, I do love the golds, the reds, the browns from the 1870s, so I really enjoyed making this quilt in 4-inch squares of reproduction fabrics. And then it's from the same time period as the postage stamps. I used a variety of backgrounds to get that scrappy look. But you know, the pioneer quilt makers would be envious of my handle method, because instead of sewing bias strips for the handles, I used fusible bias tape. Oh boy, what a fast method. Well, Sue made me this charming tea tray. It's just perfect for 1 cup. And she has 4 baskets set on point. Ooh, I love that light blue basket weave. And then the patchwork is protected by a piece of glass. But tea time is over. It's time for quilting those little baskets. This is the perfect project for Swatch Club members that receive samples in the mail every month. Can you believe these are just 4-inch squares? Oh, and it is fun to do. Now, to make 1 basket block, you only need to have 1 4-inch square of background, and that 4-inch square of background will be divided. It'll be for the top part with the handle and then the bottom part of the basket. And you also need to have a 5-inch piece of fusible bias tape. That's going to make it really easy. And then the sides come from a piece that is 2 1/4 inches by 4 1/4 inches. And then the last piece that you need is a 4-inch square in medium or dark, and that is for the basket part and the feet. Oh my gosh, just 3 pieces to remember. Easy. Now, you need to have a 4-inch square of template plastic. Take it and draw a dashed line corner to corner, and then cut out an oval. This is our pattern for our handle piece. And then just take it and center it right on that 4-inch square, and then just go ahead with a permanent marking pen. Just trace right inside that oval. And actually, this is enough right here for 2 handles. Okay, so let's just take this, cut it in half on 1 diagonal. Get that ready. Okay. Got 2 pieces from 1 square. We need to have some fusible bias tape, and then all you need to do is just take it and place it so that the left edge of the bias tape is on the right side of the handle. Ooh, and let's just see if we can't do this carefully. Get that lined up there, and then just roll that around. Use some steam, have a very hot iron, and just place that right around. And it is great. You don't even need to have a stiletto for that very end of it. Got the handle in place, and then you just take this piece, and this is that side piece, take it, fold it in half, and put a nice crease in there. So, best thing is that you don't even need to stitch down the edges of the bias tape, especially if you're not going to wash that wall hanging. Now, who washes wall hangings anyways? So let's just go ahead, stack up the handles here, stack up the pieces for the sides, and we've got a beautiful stack of anniversary florals, 4-inch squares, and for the wall hanging that we're doing, we need to have 13 different ones. Actually, this is just so pretty to look through, I don't even want to cut them up, but nonetheless, line up the diagonal line on the squares and cut in half. Now the half on the left is going to go with the handle pieces. The remaining half, we're going to take the 1/4-inch line and the ruler. We have to make it a little bit smaller for the feet. So we're going to put the 1/4-inch line on the ruler, just cut right through. Oh my gosh, thought I did it all 13 in one time. Just need to have a little sliver. Just get rid of that. And then these pieces, these smaller pieces, go with the sides. So, stacked up, ready for sewing. 1/4-inch seam. We've got the 1/4-inch foot in place. Just take the handle and flip it right sides together to the basket. Take the side, flip it right sides together to the feet, and this time you want to make sure that you line up that fold right with the tip of that triangle. And then just grab up the top two. Oh, if you could keep these in order, you would be in business. So just line up these pieces, and actually there's just a little bit of that bias tape sticking out for using the 1/4-inch foot. Let's just clip that off. Line up the edges and just stitch right along there. I've got that bias edge, not going to stretch, and you keep the edges together. 1/4-inch along here, you're going to assembly line sew from the basket, then right into the feet. So let's just pick that piece up. Keep them together. It's much easier if you can keep them together instead of getting them all mixed up. And just assembly line sew this one right behind. So you would just continue repeating the same step 13 times to make this small wall hanging. All right, got the sewing done. How about some Darth Vader ironing? Just take this piece, 2 pieces, drop it with dark on the top, set the seam, and then just lift the piece, the dark piece, up and over, and you just come right into it. And on this one, let's just try to keep that little fold right there. Gosh, we are nearly done with this already. So just take this now, and you want to trim the tips right in the edge. Trim right there and trim right here. So we've got a square, and this piece right here, just take your ruler and your rotary cutter, and following that fold that we pressed in, just cut on that line. So you're going to see we've got a foot here and a foot there. Looking good. Okay, now let's just take this piece and flip it right sides together to it. And the tricky part right now is to allow 1/8 of an inch up at the very top. 1/8 of an inch. I found out whenever I was squaring this up that I needed to have that 1/8 of an inch, so I ended up with a square block in the end. Pretty amazing. So just go ahead and sew this down one side. Grab up that stiletto. We've got a big tip hanging out on the end. You need to have that because it's oversized, and it'll work out so much better in the end. Okay, you can just go ahead and finger press along here. Just lift this piece up and over. Finger press it so that the seam is behind the background. And then the second foot piece is going to go right here like this. Line it up. When you flip it right sides together, same thing. You need to have 1/8 of an inch. Not much, but that is amazing how much that helps. So line up that 1/8 of an inch right at the top, a little extra. Get that underneath there. And you would be just assembly line sewing. I mean, get them all done. Now, so you can use the 1/4-inch foot right here. got that big old tip hanging out. Just cut that off. You just take that, get rid of it, and just keep on going. That bar and that 1/4 inch foot is great, but whenever those tips are hanging out, just can't go. Okay, so now all I have is one final pressing here. Just take it and set the seam on the side, lift it up and over, and I'm just going to turn from the back, make sure I've got it pressed. Perfect. Now, the last part comes from an additional 4-inch square. You just take, this is enough for 2, take that 4-inch square, cut it in half, and one of these is going to go right onto the bottom of this basket. Okay, let's just go ahead. Oh my gosh, look at that crooked edge. Well, that'll never do. So let's just square that off. Take the 45-degree line on your ruler and line it up right along with the edge. I can see I've got a 1/4 inch seam right here, and I'm just going to tip that up just a little bit. I want the 1/4 inch seam along there, but I want to straighten it from seam to seam. Okay, now let's see if this is going to go on there. All right, extra, excess in size, flip it right sides together, and from the wrong side, you want to make sure that you have equal tips hanging out on both sides, and this is where we want to cut it, right along there, right along that seam. That's the last seam to do in the basket. Truly amazing. Well, it's so much fun to just go ahead and change with the different fabrics. You could do a little reproduction. 1930s basket is so cute. I like the 1860s is one of my favorites, but you could do it in all Kool-Aid colors. Ooh, I have a really nice one in Kool-Aid colors to show you. Now, that's it right there. So all you need to do is just take this and press this over flat, and that is the last step. Now we've got to make this a perfect square, about 5 inches. That'll work good. So let's just go ahead and take the 6-inch square up ruler and line it up with the outside edges. I want to make sure I have the 1/4 inch seam right there, 1/4 inch seam right there. Looking good. It is larger than a 5-inch. That helps. So you're going to square it to 5 inches or whatever size you need to square it to have a consistent size. Okay, once you square those two sides, just turn it around completely. Drop your ruler, your 6-inch square ruler. Here's the 5 inches along here. Just hold it flat, trim it both sides, and that is perfect. Got it ready. So let me just finish all the other baskets, and I'll show you how to sew the top together. The blocks are done. We're rolling on. Now, if you want to do, the setting is this one. This has the 13 blocks in it, and the blocks are set in diagonal rows, block to block. But if you'd like to make less blocks or maybe economize on the blocks that you have, you can go ahead and cut 5-inch squares and then just place them every other one. That way you can stretch out your blocks. Or you could do a straight set just by taking your blocks and turning them so that the handles are all going in the same direction like this. Then you'd have a straight outside edge just with blocks, or just like I showed you in the postage stamp, you can go ahead at this time. Oh, why not? Just take 4. Turn all the handles into the middle, make blocks of 4, and then set the blocks of 4 together. It's perfect. But I am hanging on to my original plan. So let me just pick these up, get them out of this way, and we'll just show you. Now the side triangles come from 2 different sizes of squares. The first one is a 7 3/4 inch square, and you need to have 2 of them. So just take your ruler, line up that diagonal line, and we're going to cut on both angles so that we literally cut it into 4 pieces. Now when you do it this way and you place the triangles into the outside edges, the bias is in the inside now, and then the straight of the grain is on the outside edge. Now especially when we're adding our folded borders, we are going to want a nice straight edge on the outside. Okay, so let me just get these in, And just got one side over there, but that's filling out great. The second size square is 4 1/4 inches, and these are for the corners. So you just make one cut right down through the center on the diagonal, and then when you place them, the straight of the grain is on the outside edge, the bias is on the inside. Perfect. Ooh, I just love the little lilacs filling the outside edge. Now when you sew the rows together, you think in terms of diagonal rows. So separate them out into rows like this. Now this will be the first one. Now when you sew this one together, you just take this triangle, flip it right sides together, match up the square edge, and sew it along. You'll have a tip right here hanging out, and then when you fold that back, you do the opposite side. Sew along, match up that square edge, have that tip hanging out, and then you'll fold it out so that the seam is behind the side triangle. And then the corner triangle is the last one. When you flip that right sides together, equal tips on both sides, and fold it out. So just go ahead and sew diagonal rows together like this, and then put all the diagonal rows together into one top. As soon as I'm done, I'll show you how to do the folded border and the mitered corners. I added my folded border around the outside edge, and it just gives that touch just to frame the quilt. Now the folded border comes from a 1 1/4 inch strip that you press in half, wrong sides together, and you match up the raw edges of the folded border with the raw edges of the quilt and stitch on 2 opposite sides with 10 stitches to the inch. Oh my gosh, you've got to lengthen your stitch or you'll get all that puckering. You sew 2 opposite sides and do not fold them out, and then you add to the 2 remaining sides, and then whenever you finish up, they just overlap in the corners, just giving that special touch. Now I added strips that I'm going to miter. I did some floral vines around the outside edge, and you see that they're longer on both sides. You've got to plan this. You take and measure the width of the stripe, and you need to add that on extra on each side, plus, I like to add 1 inch or 2 just so I can miter that corner. And then when you sew them, there's a tiny stripe on here. You sew right along here and you put a dot and stop 1/4 inch from the edge. So that if you just flip that back, you could see there's 1/4 inch extra right there. You didn't stitch on it. It's the same thing on the opposite side. You keep everything folded out of the way, stitch up to that dot, and stop 1/4 inch from the end. So when you peel these both back, then you see that 1/4 inch right in the corner. Now, there's a couple of different ways to miter this, but I'm going to show you a couple, but I'll show you my favorite. Okay, take your strip, lay it out like this, and then just fold over the second strip on top. And think about a miter as a 45-degree angle. So I just take that top piece and fold it back under at the 45-degree angle. And because there's stripes on this, it's really easy to match. Just take out here in that extra, line up those stripes, and when they're lined up, you can go ahead and take a ruler and check. Just place it right on here and see, perfect, 45 there. Here's the squaring lines lined up with the border. All right. So then, traditional way is just to take and crease this from the right side. And once you have it creased, grab hold of this very carefully. In fact, I think some pins would really be appropriate. And you just fold back everything. And then see the fold right along there? You start at that 1/4 inch dot and stitch right out to the outside edge. And then just trim the extra away. But sometimes I have a hard time getting that stripe matched perfectly. So instead of doing all that folding back and forth, I like to set my machine for a blind hem stitch. And I'm just going to pin that right there. I have a blind hem stitch, and you would be putting on invisible thread in your sewing machine. But since you can't see invisible, I'm just going to leave in my red thread. Use needle down, and you take your straight stitch in your blind hem along your background, right along that fold, and then you take a bite in there. I'm using a very wide bite right now, but I would go ahead and take, a very tiny bite like number 1.5 on this, but at least you'll see how you can do it. Now this way, I can always be assured that my stripes are going to line up even whenever this whole quilt is finished. Well, I'm going to go ahead, finish my quarters, and then I'll get some binding and machine quilting done. This is my favorite quilt. I call this my fruit drink quilt. It looks like orange juice and lemonade and apple juice, all the bright, clear colors. And I love the side triangles. The side triangles come from a fabric that is directional. You can see that the leaves are always up and down. The flowers are growing right in this one. And you have to cut it a special way so that you can end up with the directional flowers all standing up. The second thing that I want to show you from this quilt is how to make the chain stitch with embroidery floss or pearl cotton instead of that fusible bias tape, which you can just get all nice bright colors in it. Now, I already have my 7 3/4 inch square cut. You can see the directional fabric, all the flowers growing up. You do your diagonal cut, then you take the top triangle to the top of the quilt, and then each of the sides in their direction, and then the bottom. So you have to carefully cut it and place it. Now the corners have to be cut in opposite directions. You've got to remember that. So right here, if we cut the 1/4 inch square in half on one diagonal, this has got to go in this corner. This one has to go up in this corner. And then second one, opposite way. This will go here, and this will go right up here. Well, it's so much fun to get those flowers growing straight. I want to show you the chain stitch now. I have the braided floss. This is actually pearl cotton. So I'm just going to pull out 2 pieces of the pearl cotton. Now you need to have it at least twice as long and a little bit longer so you can work with it. Boy, I have a nice long piece here. I have the handle on tearaway stabilizer, and you just take the end of this, divide it in half, put it right at the end of the handle, stitch across it. It's underneath my foot now. Use the needle down position on your sewing machine, and then just reverse sew off of this. And once you reverse sew, you take hold of the ends of the floss and you pull them through your foot so that they are now on the top of the foot. All right, how about a longer stitch? We've got such a small stitch on here. I'd like to go up to, say, 3.5. Ooh, that sounds good. Okay, hold on to both ends of your floss and just take 3 stitches forward. 1, 2, 3. And stop with the needle in and just go crisscross right in the top. And then once you've crisscrossed, somehow I've gotten some other threads that just decided to join me right there. All right, so they're crisscross. And now I'm just going to stitch right across it. 2, 3. Needle down, crisscross again. And then just pivot, turn with your needle in. 1, 2, 3. And just take another crisscross. Well, you can get into this. You get into such a nice, even motion with this. Counting your stitches and crisscrossing. Actually, this machine stitching looks nicer than I could ever do by hand, but it works just great. Okay, just take a couple more. You can see it coming off the end there, and you can get floss or pearl cotton just to match. It's great. Well, let me show you just a few more blocks. You can have so much fun because right here I made little blocks and I did a broderie purse idea. I took the lilac fabric, put fusible web on the back of it, and then I just cut little flowers out, tore the paper back away, and then I just fused them right into place. Well, you could do a springtime look as this one. This one is just great with holly. Trimmed out that holly, tore the paper away, just fused it right in place. Now, one more thing you could do would be to add some red beads right on top of the berries. Or what if you want to do the little chain stitching and just put some buttons right in there? Well, making the baskets is just great fun, you know, and it's also a stress reducer. So don't become a basket case. Enjoy making your quilts instead.